How did you get to New York?
So I had the great fortune of being born in Staten Island. And I have never really left. As I was telling you, I went to college at NYU. So I was in Manhattan for a little bit. But otherwise, I have stayed in New York City my whole life.
Were you always an artistic girl? Was that there from the very beginning? What do you remember about that?
I was always drawing as a kid. I would tell my parents that I want to be an artist when I grew up, and they're physicians, so they weren't the most supportive. They said art is a wonderful side hobby, but they were apprehensive about me going down that path, and because they really bought into that whole starving artist. I don't want to call it a myth, because at the same time, it is tough to make it financially in the arts. But just that idea that art is a path to poverty, kind of.
Yeah. I know you told me you went to NYU. Did you go for the arts? What's that story?
I actually didn't. I went to Staten Island Technical High School, which is one of the 7 specialized high schools in New York City.
Yeah.
You have to take an exam to get in. But it used to be a vocational school. So they had all of these engineering classes. And it was really like an unusual curriculum. We were the only school that taught Russian. And that was the only language option that was given. And they had this whole packet, why Russian? At the same time, there were no art courses whatsoever. So for freshman year, our art class was technical drawing. For sophomore year, that was CAD, computer-aided design. And then for junior and senior year, just no art whatsoever. And I wasn't taking art classes. I was part of an art club, but I wasn't really building a portfolio to go to an art school. I actually thought that I would become a professor and teach English lit.
Really?
Yes. So I thought I would have like this whole future in academia. That was sort of like the stable career I thought my parents would want. And then I know it sounds like a joke because academia, stable, everybody's laughing, I'm sure, listening. But that's sort of what I thought until I got into NYU. I was majoring in English and American literature at the College of Arts and Sciences. I found out that that academia was undergoing a lot of problems. We were actually experiencing grad student strikes while I was a student. And my options for switching into like their fine arts school were a little tough because of the way NYU is set up. They have their fine arts major in their Steinhardt school. But they offer most of their like life drawing classes through their Tisch film school. And my guidance counselor at the time actually advised me like, hey, listen, I'm seeing the classes you want to take. And by and large, they are electives in the Tisch school for film. And he said, you have a better option of getting into those classes and actually taking them if you just take them as electives. And then the way it works is like, the College of Arts and Sciences would be prioritized over the Steinhardt School in getting in. Yeah. It's a weird system.
What was the appeal of English literature? What did you like about it? Why were you considering pursuing that for a while?
You know what? I've always loved reading. I actually like world literature a bit more than like English and American classics, but I would write strong essays. I did go to this like very heavily based STEM school, and I just had no passion really for any STEM subjects. So I was already being pushed away from that. My parents, mainly my dad, wanted me to pursue medicine. But at the same time, I knew like, oh, I can't look at blood. And I know I'm awful at chemistry. Like, why put myself through that? And I thought that this was like that happy balance of like, this is a career that people know how it works, in the sense like there's this very specific track you get on.
Yeah.
And it's something I like well enough, and it's just the way I considered a job. It's not something that has to be what you really love.
Not a vocation.
Right.
Yeah. So did you start taking classes at NYU that began to kind of scratch the artistic itch that led you on a new path?
Yeah. So, like I was telling you, I was looking for life drawing specifically because to me, that sort of academic training was what I had always read and heard is like how you become a serious artist. And you sort of can't go down that route if you don't have these skills. Now, I don't believe that's true, but it's what I believed at the time. And I was looking for opportunities to sort of pursue that, get into it more. And actually, it wasn't just that I was taking classes at NYU. I found these life drawing classes from Spring Studio. Now it's known as Minerva's Drawing Studio, but it is like an open drawing studio that was envisioned by Minerva Durham, and she had this idea for a figure drawing kind of walk-in location that you can access 7 days a week.
Whoa.
And that's really unusual compared to anywhere outside of the city, where like you would be lucky if there's a location somewhere within driving distance to you that offers figure drawing once a week, maybe.
Yeah. What is figure drawing for those that aren't in this world? What does that exactly mean?
Yeah, that means you have a live model posing for you as you draw. And it just means working from life. And there are certain time frames that are typical for a model to hold a pose. Those could be as short as 15 seconds, working all the way up to like, you could have a long pose at Minerva's that would be 3 hours. Maybe if you do something privately, you can, of course, arrange for a model to take the same pose for a month, right? And you'll just have them take a pose. They'll then tape up their feet, probably put some markers on the wall for them to look at and get into the same position time and time again. And they'll just take breaks around that.
Did you have a sense immediately that you had a knack for this? Did you already know you could do this well, or how did that go?
No, I thought that I was the worst, and like I would have to be rethinking my dreams. It was incredibly difficult when I started, and even just the way I would approach the figure. I guess from something I read, I already had this idea that the important thing is to mark down the full figure, right? If you're thinking you have 15 or 30 seconds to draw someone, how much of them are you really going to get? And broadly, what are you going for? And so I would always hear like the important thing is to establish an action line that sort of just conveys the entire gesture in one swoop. And then you begin to build on that with like those important masses of the body that would be indicating the head, the torso, and the way the pelvis is positioned in relation to the line of the shoulders. But basically, you really, you do want to work to get as much of the figure as possible, even if you're working that briefly.
Did you think for a while, you said you were talking about your dream. What was your dream at that time?
Oh, the dream was probably to get gallery representation down the line, and to have my a show of my work. I guess it would have been a solo show, but at the same time, I would just have wanted my work in a gallery.
Did you think that figure drawing was your future at that time? Did you think that that's what you wanted to do, or was there other kind of work at that point in your life that you were also interested in?
You know what? I always heard that like you need that foundational study of the figure. My interest in it has kept up. There is something addictive almost in drawing it, because you never, or at least I never, walk away satisfied. Like, all right, that was enough. I feel like I've mastered what's out there. And I mean, everyone's features are so unique too. So there's a lot to build on and play with. But at the same time, actually, I wanted to move into painting. And like really exploring color, because at the main area where I was working, it was one of the limitations that nobody was allowed to work in oil paints. So every once in a while, I would work in watercolor, and I switched over to pastel, which do provide you with color. But pastel has its own drawbacks as a medium, mainly that it's a little bit more fragile, right? You're working with dust, and you can spray it with fixative, but because of that, it's not the easiest to frame. And I just saw oil painting as maybe like skipping over certain problems. Then I started painting, and eventually, right, once I started sculpting, I realized that's actually what I love the most. But I don't think I ever like worked in a medium and said to myself, this is it. This is everything. And I never actually want to explore beyond that. I always also hear about people's artistic practices, and it almost kind of like gets you excited. Like, oh, they're doing that. You know what? Maybe I should like try working in metal or try working in glass. But it takes a while to build skills and techniques to really like feel as if you have so much control over something that you can live up to your ambitions for the projects you want. So in a way, scaling back kind of lets you hunker down and really work on something.
When did you get into sculpting?
So I never actually did any serious sculpting before I got a job in statue restoration. And initially, when I took on some projects that involved minor repairs, they were so small that it almost felt like slotting in a puzzle piece, right? It felt really accessible to repair. And then I guess I just sort of felt as though I had a good grasp on those jobs. And so luckily for me, any project I had just worked out that it was almost to scale, right? Later on, I was repairing fingers and drapery and sort of missing areas in the shoulder, right, for figures. But it never felt as though I have this massive area to rebuild and I have no idea how to do it. I mean, a drawing background helps tremendously. I had been doing a lot of portraiture, a lot of figure drawing, as I told you. And when you have a sculpture to work from, it feels as though like you have the blueprint, so to speak.
How did you get into statue restoration?
Yeah.
What is that story? So,
after graduating college, I did have a solo show, but it was through Minerva. So I was very fortunate that she gave me this opportunity to exhibit my abstract expressionist portraits. And that went well. It's just that it wasn't like suddenly I had, $1 million worth of art sales. Right? So I still needed to support myself. I went into like graphic design, doing business cards and menus for restaurants mainly. And then during the pandemic, when restaurants were really hurt by all of the closures in the city, I was like the first kind of work they did not need. And I got a job. Actually, it was like a one-off job doing a mural for a church. And later I was called back by the priest who had hired me, asking me if I would repair these statues for him. And I had told him that I have really no background in the kinds of repairs he's asking for. And there was one sculpture in particular, he said, well, listen, I have nobody else really who would try this. And if you can't fix it, to be honest, I'm just going to throw it away. So there's really nothing to worry about. And that was, I guess, maybe the second statue I worked on. I did an interior one first. That was a smaller repair. And then I began working on this exterior statue made of wood. And a lot of people listening are probably going to say, outdoor statue made of wood, that doesn't sound too promising. And it shouldn't be outside. And that was part of the reason it was damaged and I was fixing it.
How did that go? Did you, given that there was no downside, he's going to throw it away even if you fuck it up.
Yeah.
How was it? Extremely challenging? Did you kind of figure it out how to do the restorations fairly quickly? This is self-taught mostly, it sounds like.
It was largely self-taught. I did actually meet people down the line who also work in restoration, but on a much different scale. Like we're talking doing restoration for the Met Cloisters and the main branch of the New York Public Library, right? Like those very prestigious kind of jobs. But yeah, at this time, this was low pressure, low stakes, and I was kind of learning as I go. And it was an interesting experience because like I was working publicly. One of the reasons I was hired was because they did not want to send the statue somewhere else. And that meant it stayed at its fixed location, which was right outside a rectory door, at a parish that also had a school nearby. And so people would see me working outside. And even there was a former pastor who used to come to get physical therapy at a building across the street. And he would say, "Oh, every time I see you, it just, it's like such a beautiful reminder of being patient." And I was saying like, well, actually, I think I'm going incredibly slowly and I wish I could pick up the pace. So I'm not a patient person whatsoever. Yeah, but it had its challenges in the fact that it was a slow job. And that sort of work requires a lot of menial labor. Like sometimes I tell people, or I used to tell people in the past, I work in statue restoration, and they would actually think it sounds kind of cool. I have no idea why, but nobody really pictures a lot of sanding, and I think that's the bulk of the job, to be honest. It's a lot of slow removal of old paint, a lot of sanding surfaces to be even, and then when you do a repair, of course, it depends on the material you're working in, but then you have to sand it smooth, and that's just the most time-consuming process about it.
Tedious.
Yes, tedious work.
Did you enjoy that work?
I found a lot of aspects to enjoy about it. I mean, I feel like I would almost get into like a meditative trance.
Yeah, like a flow state.
Yeah, flow state, definitely. And I could listen to different things while working, sometimes podcasts like this.
There you go.
But also, I guess because these were religious statues, I'm Catholic. So I got like a sense of fulfillment out of it.
And you said through the statue restoration, you got into sculpting. How did that happen?
I guess that probably started with having to repair plaster statues, because that was the most involved. Really, like that repair jobs became. I did have like one cement job that had a lot of drapery that needed repair. But there are certain areas in a sculpture that are just naturally more fragile. It's anything freestanding somewhat. So like you can picture an outstretched arm. Anything that's small and sticking out. So fingers, especially if they're separated, toes can be vulnerable. A lot of times people look at classical statues that are missing noses. It's because the noses are sticking out. So those are sort of the zones you start to see damage. And I would build out these smaller spaces. Actually, normally I could not even sculpt something and make a mold to then join it. A lot of times I could just directly build up plaster and then sort of carve it away and sand it. Yeah.
To then make it fit, to make it work.
Right. To give it like the appearance of like fingers that were being rebuilt.
Did you get a sense at some point, and maybe this is later when you begin to actually do your own sculpting, that this is what you want to do? This is the art that aligns with you, that is sort of what you want to devote yourself to do?
So I guess going back to that idea of like being in a flow state,
Yeah.
right? I found a lot of satisfaction and contentment in what I was doing. And I still liked painting. And again, when I was talking about certain sculptures just acting as a blueprint of all of the steps you need to take, when it would come to painting those sculptures, it never really felt like approaching a blank canvas and being maybe stressed out about a painting in your head not matching up to what you're actually executing on that canvas. So I did find it like less frustrating than painting. And I don't know if I am able to pinpoint exactly why that is. I guess the great thing about a sculpture is that you can walk around it and you can touch it from all angles. And then when you're painting something, you're working on this two-dimensional picture plane, and you're usually trying to give it a three-dimensional appearance. It depends, of course, what you're painting. But it does feel almost like that sensation if you're interacting with a screen, especially a non-touch screen, right? It almost feels like you have this barrier in between you.
What did you start when you began to do more sculpting? What about it spoke to you? What did you particularly enjoy about that process? You just alluded to some of that, but the actual making of it, what resonated?
So I guess I'll start by saying what medium I began doing my own original sculptures in. And I started in stone, which, looking back, maybe it wasn't a mistake, because once you move from stone to clay is so much easier and you feel like you're on top of the world working in it.
Because it's more malleable?
Because it's more forgiving, right? Any kind of carving is a subtractive method of sculpture. And so once you take away, that material is just gone.
Yeah.
And if you can imagine approaching something like carving a face, and now you mess up on the nose, and the nose is the point of the face that protrudes the most, suddenly, how are you going to fix the rest of the face? You would just need to take everything down another layer if the nose is still sticking out the most, right? Yeah. So I began working in stone. And I sort of started with a baby, and that would be a separate subject why I chose that piece. But just working with it, it was like a very slow process. It was a very careful process. And it was so time consuming, I switched into working in water-based clay. That clay sort of afforded me the freedom to make immediate changes. And that was something I really loved. It's almost like you feel as if you have an undo button. I'm not an artist who loves to really plan everything out meticulously. I look for happy accidents. I look for changing something maybe once I can see it. I don't want to say not working, but if I can sort of see something more appealing, by following different lines, I like to have the freedom to then play around with that.
I would love to know, and I ask most of my guests this, as you begin to get more deeply into sculpting, how are you supporting yourself? Are you continuing with the restoration work? That's really what's paying the bills to give you the space and the time to pursue sculpting more seriously?
So that was the case. Yeah. That it had been. And then more recently, I needed to take a step back from that. And so it's a matter of going back and forth.
Why babies? I know you mentioned that a couple of times. What's the story as to? I've seen some of your stuff. I've seen some of your work online. Why that specifically?
So the vision I had when I started my marble piece, right? It was just always something that was in the back of my mind when I was approaching the figure. Minerva Durham used to give these mini lectures during the models breaks. And one of the things she said was she was quoting this German art historian, Johann Joachim Winkelmann, who wrote about the figure. The human figure stands erect, perpendicular to the earth. And he was talking about the importance of Greek sculpture and what these sort of poses indicate about our own harmony with nature. But these kind of classic Greek poses didn't feel very natural to me. And they weren't poses that I saw everyday people taking. They weren't part of my daily life. And sort of, I had friends who started to have kids. And, you know, you get photos every once in a while. You get like the ultrasound scan. And if you're thinking about the origin point of the human figure, to me, it just struck me as like, this is the moment. Like that sort of contorted pose. These are like our first movements. They feel very universal. I almost feel like the infant form is a universal portrait of humanity. If that sounds too pretentious, right?
Well, we were all there at one time.
We were all there. Yeah. It's this vulnerable, dependent state. It's also like this sort of jumping point of tremendous growth. There's a newness there. There's sometimes like a stretching outward. So those aspects of the form really appeal to me. And when you were asking me about a little behind the scenes look at like what it actually takes to make money as an artist, I will say there were some practical considerations in choosing like baby sculptures. I do like I was telling you this earlier before we started the podcast, I really like the size of the form, the scale of the work. So I'm able to work life size, but at a very small scale. And I like portraiture, but how many people are out there buying portraits and of whom? But I feel like with babies, people just have that inbuilt attachment. And I know women who are out there who are getting those ultrasound scans 3D printed. Have you heard about that?
I don't think so, but it doesn't surprise me people do that.
Okay, well, I hate to say it, but they're kind of creepy. No, right? Like they're like horror images. But I was looking at those, and I know why people would get them. It's because that's your baby, and that's a little bit of like a glimpse of what their face will look like, and it's just so compelling for that reason. And so I thought, you know what? I bet like people would want to buy a sculpture of their own child. Especially, I even had this happen to me this past week. I was at the Art Students League. I was working on my marble piece because it still isn't finished after all of this time. And the woman at the locker next to me was working in the wax room. So I'm wheeling out my marble piece to go into the pneumatics room. It involves like just pushing out the stand past the lockers. And she takes a look at my baby sculpture. And she is just genuinely moved. She tells me that past weekend, her daughter graduated college. And of course, it brought back a lot of memories. So that's incredibly rewarding. And I feel like those moments are something that like an artwork, like a baby sculpture, can sort of preserve forever. I mean, photos are wonderful and irreplaceable, but that just can't compare to the feeling of being able to like hold your baby again, which you can achieve through a sculpture.
That's fascinating. So now the work that you do, is it purely commission based? People hire you to do these, you have an image or you meet the child and then you do it for them. How does that work?
So the body of work I'm working on now, it's completely based off of my imagination. I'm not sculpting faces from photographs. I do have a commission coming up because I have a friend who's having a baby. And that is a direction I would like to move into. But regardless, I'm sort of preparing for another show to have on my own. So I would like to get into that. I mean, I can work that way, and that's what I feel would be ideal. I'd like to get, let's say, a profile, 3/4 view, frontal picture of someone's baby, right? Sculpt it to their liking and have a commission.
Not to promote you too much, but if somebody hears this and they're interested in hiring you, what do you charge? What would it cost to, roughly speaking, to get your own baby for forever?
I would say it depends on like the material. If it's an aqua resin sculpture, the price would go up. If someone is just interested in a flat color, right, we'll just go with white, right? Or they want to mimic stone, right? White, gray, black. Something like that could cost $3,500.
I always ask every guest about how they think about success in their career. And I don't know how long you've been doing the sculpting. It sounds relatively recent.
Yeah.
If I talk to you in 3 years from now or 5 years from now, what do you, I don't know how much detail you think about this, but what would a successful career or a successful trajectory look like to you?
You know what? It's tough to answer because I was reading one of Jerry Saltz's books, and he was referencing the fact that there are artists he knows who have the big MoMA show, and that was it, because that was always where they envisioned themselves and how they define success for them. And like once you reach that, and in some cases, right, for some people, it's this big, gigantic, like Whitney biennial kind of career success. And for other people, it's something as, I don't want to say simple, but, as ordinary as their MFA thesis show. So, I mean, I guess I wouldn't want to define my vision of success on a specific moment like that. I will say I have been incredibly moved by other people's artwork. And I suppose kind of exhibiting my work and having people relate to it in a powerful way would really be enough for me. It's sort of like a feeling of being understood through your work, right? I guess I don't really think accolades bring that much sense of satisfaction, right? Because most people I speak to, or even like the smaller successes I've exhibited at New York Fashion Week, it's like you do it, and in that moment you feel great, but almost immediately you ask yourself, what's next?
Yeah.
I guess for me, the scale of the projects I could see myself doing in the future, right? If I'm able to like access those bigger dreams that involve larger works, works of different kinds of material, right? Things that I would shy away from because of cost. If I'm able to achieve those types of projects, I would define that as like a good indicator of success for me.
Nobody knows the future, but do you get the sense that this specific type of art, making sculptures, is your thing? That 5 years from now, this is what you're going to be doing?
You know what? Unless I'm able to seriously pick up the pace, I can definitely say 100% I will be doing this in 5 years. But yes, I definitely envision myself sticking with sculpting.
I'd love to know what your family is now thinking about your doctor parents that, you were in, it sounds like a technical STEM school for high school.
Yeah.
And now you're seemingly doing full-time artistic work, or at least for a big chunk of your life.
Yeah.
I don't know if they were ever, really discouraging you from this, but how is that going? How's the messaging from your community and your family about what you're up to going for you?
So my parents did turn out to be supportive, especially my mom. She always thinks it's just a matter of time, that I just need the right people to see my work. She's a fan of my sculptures. For a long time, my dad was still saying, like, it's not too late to go to medical school. That has stopped. So it is too late to go to medical school. I mean, I feel as though maybe he had to make peace with it a little bit more. And I feel as though maybe those outward markers of success would placate him a little bit more, right? When I have work at the Whitney Biennial, he'll sleep more soundly. Or the Venice Biennale, right? But they have been supportive, and I would find it very tough to be in New York creating art without their help.
You talked earlier, you used the phrase starving artists, and I think that's what most people think of when they think of people that are doing creative work full-time, particularly in a place like New York that's so expensive. What have you learned about the truth of that statement? I guess mostly as it applies to you. Do you feel like a starving artist? Are you really struggling outside of the creative aspect of your life? Do you feel like life is really difficult and that there is a starving aspect to the pursuit you're on?
I would say, given the worldwide problems that other people face, right? I'm in such a privileged position, it would be insulting to suggest that. In many ways, I'm so lucky, and then so many other people in the world just don't have the opportunity to pursue art, even in school. And as for making art in this city, there are so many artists living here, and there are so many opportunities for artists as well. That's when it starts to get into a little bit of tricky territory, right? With the amount of competition you see for certain grants, even for certain exhibition opportunities that really cater to marginalized groups, and for art that's deemed a little less commercially viable. Like, those are still things that like, those opportunities exist, but for anybody who's trying to pursue them, they're still probably going to face a lot of rejection and a lot of obstacles into getting down that path. But just to be an artist, I feel like it takes, I want to call it like a certain level of delusion, but but right, you have to feel inside like there's a reason for you to create.
What is that reason for you?
You know what? I just don't think I'm able to regulate myself without some sort of creative outlet. If I weren't sculpting, right, at the very least, I'd be sketching. Like, it's a language unto itself. And art is a skill, right, that anyone can build at, and it's a form of communication. So I feel like as long as you feel like there's something that you would want to share, then you have a reason to create art.
And that's just a part of your personality, it sounds like.
I think it's a part of everyone's personality. I think just the way that they'll manifest their own creative energy takes different forms.
The last question I would love to ask is about advice you would give to a friend who is considering pursuing the arts, something similar to what you're up to. What knowledge have you gained about how to do this effectively, affordably? What's important wisdom or knowledge you've gained in your career pursuing the arts in New York that you would share to a friend or you would give to the younger version of yourself?
I feel like one of the most important skills an artist can have is the ability to persevere through discouragement. And even at the beginning of May, I sold a pastel that I did in 2019. And why did it sell in 2025 versus 2020, 2019? I mean, that was the pandemic and lockdown, but still. And it was just about being in front of the right buyer at the right moment. And a lot of good fortune in art as a field is just that, good fortune. Some of it's luck, some of it's timing. And I don't want to downplay skill, but I will say there are a lot of artists making all kinds of art, and different things will speak to different people. So what would really help is taking opportunities to exhibit your work and to put it in front of people and have people respond to it.
Giving yourself more opportunities for luck to happen.
Yes. Yes. And so pursuing opportunities that would put your artwork in spaces where people can see it.
Yeah. Michelle, thanks for doing this. This is great.
Thanks so much for having me on your podcast, Dan.
My pleasure.